Now in this tutorial we're going to talk about figure eights and 180s. These two maneuvers are kind of they're really fundamental for team flying, particularly if you're just jumping into a line, starting to learn it, that sort of thing. So a figure eight looks simply like this. Back and forth, back and forth. So what you'll most often see is teams following in a line like that. And so the way that we're going to do a figure eight, let's assume that you're coming at this from a beginner standpoint, is there's a little bit of dual line. To get a really smooth figure eight, I think that most people when they start it, they're using a lot of thumb and it tends to spin out. The other thing is that they'll get down here and then they'll lose control and then have to power up again. So the way that we're usually teaching it on the line is when you're starting the right roll, the first right half of the figure eight, that hand, we're going to bring it in and down like this at the same time, and we're going to hold that, not too far, all the way through the turn until it is now pointed diagonally up to the next corner. That's what this looks like. So my right hand is going to draw in, and then it sets back. Left hand draws in and sets back. Over and over. And again, it's important to note how one hand is dropping and coming back slightly more than the other one. And what you'll find is that gives you a much smoother figure eight and allows you to keep that forward speed going a little bit. So there are two things that you're going to run into as you're exploring this for the first time. One is the natural fear of that underturn. So right here, it's right about here, and then we start to panic and we lock up and we don't necessarily follow through. So what's important when you first start this, maybe even start higher, is to, when you bear down on that hand, to make absolutely sure that you have it bearing down until you again see the kite pointed up. So make that a very clear idea in your mind, is that you start the turn with, and you have your arm loaded in, and you maintain that arm in, keep it in, no matter what, until the kite is again facing up, and then you can release. Because that first hold is all you need to get around as long as you're making it. Now, if you do need to accelerate that turn a little bit, you didn't make it tight enough, you can then put a little bit of squeeze into the hand, the brake on that hand as well to accentuate the turn. Oh, there. So you can always nip it off a little bit with some brake to get that in there. So that's one aspect that you'll run into. Again, lock in that turn, watch the leading edge, stay true to the turn until you're again facing up. But the other one now is, especially in lighter wind, sometimes we'll make the bottom of that figure eight and you'll find that it sort of stalls out or you lose gas. So one of the reasons for that, again, is that you've gone into a turn, which is kind of a brake turn, and probably at some level you've slowed the kite down. So then you've finished the turn and now it's facing up, but it's not in that full go control stance. So what we're going to look for is, as soon as you've held it in, you've made the turn, and as soon as you see it line up, then you're going to consciously set back in with the gas. Now, let's see if we can see that happen here. So there's the right turn and set the gas. Make the turn and set the gas. And so the key, of course, is to build it up so that you have a relatively even speed throughout. But you'll find that that little nuance of just that subtle consciousness towards applying a little bit of forward out of the bottom of the turn will help. So the other thing, the last component I'm going to give you about figure eights, is to see the shape very clearly. So the way we're going to build this out is actually a rectangle. So let's say that this is the center of our window. I'm going to fly to the top right corner of that rectangle. I'm going to make a half a circle to the bottom right corner of the rectangle, and then I'm going to fly a nice long straight line. Then I'm going to make that half circle to the bottom corner of that rectangle and repeat over and over again, focusing on a nice straight path from one lower corner to the next top corner. And so that tends to give the figure eight a lot more structure, a lot more clarity, and especially when you're following, it helps get off the idea of having to chase the tail of that snake, because every single person on that follow line is trying to follow the kite in front of them, and it creates this oscillation. But if everybody knows what the general shape is, built on that rectangle, and are following it and simply keeping the right space from the kite in front of them, each person doing their job, you end up getting a much, much cleaner follow line. So that's the general overview on figure eights. we'll go on to the next one, which is 180s. Now, 180 is a paramount maneuver, just simply for reversing direction. You're going one way, you want to turn around and go the other way without taking up a big path doing it. So the first 180 that most people try, of course, is an upturn 180. As a new flyer, it gets you away from that underturn scare where you face down for a second and have to recover. So the upturn 180, let's start it from a static position right here. We're just going to face up and then face left. Face up and then face right. So very straightforward. On a traveling form, it looks like this. Face, face, and go. Face, face, and go. But if we can do it smoothly, it starts to look like this. And ideally, the kite is going to be rotating around its axis, as to say that the center panel is more or less going to stay in place and allow you to change position without coming back on a different altitude than you started on. Now, the most common 180 used in team flying is the underturn 180. We simply call it the 180. In shorthand, we'll often call it 80 now. So, with the underturn 180, the reason that we use it first off is that facing down and then back, actually, once you've learned it, allows you to cut more pressure and reinitiate your power going the other way. A kite in this shape naturally generates more power when it's upside down than it does when it's upright. So with that in mind, the underturn 180 looks more like this. And on the traveling path, looks like that. And that is something like you would see on a thread. Two kites passing, they turn around, they pass again, turn around, pass again. Now, to do a 180, there's a couple of different approaches, and a lot of it's going to depend on your physicality and your style and the tuning, frankly, that you have in your kite. So what we're looking at here is that when you do a 180, in its very most fundamental sense, facing down, the kite, see that it wants to sink by nature. So if you're doing a 180 in place, you'll notice the altitude of my hands. Watch them drop as I go through this 180. And then they come back up to position. So the reason for that is that in the invert, I'm pressing on the brakes. But I don't want to do all that with my hands while I'm actually making the 180. So instead, I'm simply lowering my hands and then putting them back to position. And that lowering, again, is like we learned in the reverse flight tutorial, where you're pressing slightly on the karate chop edge of your hands, right through there. Now, the other way that some people will do it is by scooping the bottom brake. So the bottom brake, like that, and what you'll see is that lowest wing right there actually ends up rising and taking the place of the other wing as it goes through the rotation. So it's kind of a little bit more abrupt way to do it. So let's see what both of those look like out there on the line. So one is I rotate and I face my hands down, then I go. Rotate, bury the hands down and go. But let's see if I can do it fluidly. There it is. All right, now we'll take that with the scoop. So this is a little bit more of a scoop input. And you can see it's not quite as axis oriented, but it does work. And especially if you're learning and feeling out how the kite is actually flying and functioning, those two particular outlooks may help quite a lot. Now, the last thing I'll offer about 180s is that they do feel quite different at different altitudes. So especially if you're looking to use them in team flying, I would look a lot towards doing them on 3 different altitudes. One being a true ground pass, quite low, back and forth, 180, 180. And then we're going to go ahead and take that up to 50% height in the window. So here's our 180. That requires a little bit more pressure in the brake line because the wind, you're higher in the window and the wind is naturally pushing down on the kite more. And then the last one will be to do it actually up in the top third of the window. And here, that really requires a little bit more consciousness in those bottom lines to keep the wind from pushing you down. So once more, there's top row. Let's take it down to the bottom row, or the center row rather. There we are. Burying the hands, scooping out, and then we're going to go ahead and drop down to the bottom and do the same thing again. like so. So then the only other thing I think, well, it's in my mind, is to talk about simple break hits for the turn versus also accenting with the other hand at the same time. So when you're making that 180, don't be too shy about using a little bit of brake on one hand and a little bit of gas on the other hand to really help that rotation around. And so as I make my 180s, when I'm not thinking about it too much, you'll see me actually using both hands, and then all the same, making sure that I'm keeping pressure in the bottom lines to keep it from dropping. So there's my general introduction to figure eights and 180s. We'll keep the content coming, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.